Let's take a look at the resurrection today. We see the resurrection occurring in many different religions, and we see it obvious parallels between Jesus, Osiris, Mithra. These various religions carry the same resurrection story. Now, fundamentalists will get into the details and say, yeah, but Osiris was ripped apart in 14 pieces and Jesus was crucified. But you can't deny that all these different gods were resurrected in some way. And there is a correspondence between the resurrection and, for whatever reason, there is a tie to the Orion constellation. It's my opinion that the Orion constellation, the stars in Orion, or the Orion Nebula, has some kind of a tie to resurrection, but not in the physical sense, in the spiritual sense. And so when we talk about the concept of the Jed symbol that we're looking at right here, we're going to see how this kind of unfolds. Now, you're familiar with the symbolism that I've shown you so far. And the symbolism, if you actually know how to look for it in nature, and apparently subconsciously in a lot of these artists, you begin to see what's actually unfolding. And what you actually see is you see an archetype of a micro and macrocosmic man. The macrocosmic man, at least the largest version of it that I've found so far, is the Orion Nebula. And I do believe it goes higher. I believe what we actually have is we have this thing that's basically layers upon layers of mind. If you're familiar with Hermetic philosophy, then you know that the universe is mental and held in the mind of the all. But if you understand that, for example, you can go and dream when you go into your room at night and sleep, you're actually creating a world when you dream. You can just imagine layers upon layers of that as you go all the way up into infinity. I believe that's the way things are constructed. Things are ultimately constructed mentally. But what we actually see unfolding in all this symbolism is we see it's representations, it's archetypes. And we see this unfolding of a cosmic man. And a lot of people looked to Orion as the most important constellation. In fact, the ancient Egyptians, Orion was by far the most important constellation of all of them. So let's get into the Jed symbol real quick. So I'm going to skip down to E.A. Wallace's Budge definition. These guys kind of agree with it. Basically, this guy says that the Jed symbol was hieroglyphically as stable and enduring. And Alan Gardner here suggests that the vertebrae, that has something to do with the vertebrae and the spine. But let's get to Wallace Budge because I like his definition better. Wallace Budge, if you're not familiar with him, was the guy who translated the Egyptian Book of the Dead and also the pyramid texts. And it says that according to Wallace Budge, the Jed is the oldest symbol of Osiris. Now remember, Osiris was a resurrection god. He's what we call a dying god. Dying god, also known as a death, rebirth, dying, and rising, or resurrection deity, is a god who dies and is resurrected or reborn, either a literal or symbolic sense. Male examples include the ancient Near Eastern Greek and Norse deities, Baal, Melkart, Adonis, Eshmun, Attis, Tammuz, Ra, and the sun god, with its fusion with Osiris/Orion. Jesus, Zalmoxis, Asclepius, Orpheus, Dionysus, which is also a remake of Osiris, and Odin. And what we're going to see here is that the Orion, for example, the ancient Sumerians called Orion the light of heaven. And we see Mithra, he was also called the Lord of Light. So as Osiris was called the Lord of Light. Jesus was called the light of the world. So you get where I'm going with this. There is a specific tie to Orion for a reason. We're going to see that as we go on. But I wanted to show you what this resurrection thing was all about. This is according to Wallace Budge. The Jed is the oldest symbol of Osiris and symbolizes his backbone and his body in general. He states that originally Osiris was probably represented by the Jed alone, and that he had no other form. He regards the Jed hieroglyph as a conventional representation of a part of his spinal column and gives its meaning as to be stable, to be permanent, abiding, established firmly, enduring. Here's a symbol of them raising the Jed, which basically is the backbone. So raising the Jed would be basically the same as their resurrection ceremony that they held every year. The reconstruction of the body of Osiris occurred at a place called Jeddu in the delta region of Lower Egypt, and it was here that yearly ceremony of raising the Jed pillar took place on the last day of the month, the eve of the agricultural new year. The next day marked the beginning of the 4-month-long season of Pert, or going forth, during which the lands rose out of the floodwaters, allowing the fields to be sown. Jeddu is also referred to as Per-Asar Neb Jeddu, meaning the house of Osiris, the lord of Jeddu. The Greeks called it Busiris, after the shortened title Per-Asar, the house of Osiris. Now, where is Busiris? This is the Nile Delta, and as you see, what I have marked along here are different temples along the Nile. This right up here is the area called Jeddu or Busiris. You'll notice it is right inside the very middle of the Nile Delta. And this is where they held the yearly resurrection, or the raising of the Jed column. The interesting thing about the Nile Delta and the Nile is that, if you remember, we just went over that Osiris was represented as the Jed column in the earliest forms. And then, so what we see right here, for example, in Luxor along this Nile, we have what is called the Temple of Man. This is where the Temple of Man is, right here. And we saw this in Magical Egypt, where it represents the different parts or the different chakra systems of man.
The secrets and magic of the mystery schools seemed lost to history when in 1937 a most unusual man again reopened a window into this culture and the magical technology that was its legacy. R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz was a latter-day alchemist, as well as an accomplished mathematician, chemist, author, and philosopher. Schwaller opened a window into the lost magic and mentality of the ancients. Through an ingenious reinterpretation of the evidence, Schwaller recreated a model of ancient Egypt that resurrects the ancient secrets for modern eyes. Understanding the mentality of the ancient world through the decoding lens of symbolism, Schwaller showed the Egyptians were not the superstitious savages modern Western academic thought holds them to have been. Instead, he showed example after example of high wisdom and accomplishment, not only equaling that of modern science, but in some instances far surpassing modern abilities. The key that unlocked the ancient veil lie in a slight change in perspective, of mindset. As one learns to enter the mindset of pharaonic Egypt, the cryptic message from the past comes to life and allows access to previously invisible and unimagined realms of consciousness, understanding, and ability. The crux of the old teachings was contained and transmitted through what Schwaller called sacred science, which included symbolism, harmonic proportion, and sacred geometry. Sacred science was the original unified source of the myriad streams of modern mysticism, occultism, esotericism, and magical disciplines that exist today. It is also the unified source for such diverse contemporary sciences as chemistry, physical science, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, geometry, architecture, music, and mathematics. Through the linchpin of sacred sciences, Schwaller not only showed an original unity of the material sciences, but even shed new light on such shadowy subjects as the tarot, astrology, and many, many other forms of magic. Schwaller spent over a decade on-site at Luxor Temple, which would come to be known as the Temple of Man. It was here that he performed his master work.
A latter-day Renaissance man. He was born in the 1890s, died in the early 1960s, and was, among other things, a practicing latter-day alchemist, and very much deeply involved in alchemy. He was also thoroughly conversant with the esoteric and mystical traditions of the East, and at the same time, equally conversant and familiar with the modern developments in science, mathematics, physics, and so on. It was Schwaller who, in 2 decades of work in Egypt, mainly at the Temple of Luxor, who reformulated in transmittable and accessible fashion the wisdom of the ancients. It is through Schwaller that we're able, for the first time, to actually gain access to the doctrine, the sacred science or sacred sciences responsible for those astonishing resonating temples, pyramids, and tombs. Prior to Schwaller, there was a long-standing tradition dating back to the Greeks themselves, in which ancient Egypt was the fount of all wisdom, which subsequently degenerated and dispersed over time. But prior to Schwaller, it was impossible to actually argue from documented evidence that this was indeed the case. Schwaller provides the documentation in impeccable form. It's there to be disproved if anyone can do so. In the 50 years since Schwaller produced the body of his work, a number of scholars have abused him roundly, but none have actually offered anything resembling satisfactory disproof or discredit to his extraordinary works.
In its own way, the Temple of Man was a kind of Rosetta Stone. It contained the means within itself to decode and reconstruct the layers and subtleties of the symbolic and sacred technology of the ancient mysteries.
So the Temple of Man in Luxor that you see right here was sort of a Rosetta Stone, and it depicted the human body and the chakra system. If any of you are not familiar, the Rosetta Stone was actually found in Alexandria, located up here in the Nile Delta area. The Nile Delta is called what it is, a river delta. Originally the Nile River Delta is so named because its shape approximates the uppercase letter delta. And if you notice, it's shaped like a triangle. So if we flip back over here to the Nile Delta, it was actually named this way because it's shaped like a triangle. Now, this picture that you saw during the video clip is important because this particular picture and what you see up here in the top of the Temple of Man actually plays right into what I have been trying to show a lot of people. And the area that I call the Trinity pattern turns out to be this area that you see right here as you go from the top of the spine into the base of the skull. And this is what we're going to find has an archetype that is found all over the place that relates man here on earth all the way up to cosmic man. So this is where we get into the discoveries that I've made. So you've already seen in ancient Egypt where they used the actual temple that was made by man in order to represent the human body. But a lot of people understand that the Nile represents the same thing. As we saw, the Jed column, and Jeddu represents the very top of the head. Now, the thing is that it doesn't take a man-made temple in order to find this. The actual pattern, the Trinity pattern that I keep telling you about, is actually located in nature as well, but you have to be able to recognize it. And that is the reason why I keep recognizing the same pattern over and over again. It's just a matter of repeatability. In 1577, the famous painter El Greco painted this right here called Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, as many of you know who are familiar with the Bible, is where Moses went to talk to God. Well, as you see right here, the stairs leading up Mount Sinai almost identically match what you see in the Nile. But the Nile is important because the Nile represents the spinal cord. And up here, right here in the center of the Nile Delta, represents Busiris. It represents Jeddu. It's where the resurrection was celebrated every year. But what we see El Greco painting is both a combination of the Nile Delta, and the brain sitting right in the center of the Nile Delta. This is very important because what he has given us here in 1577 is nature's version of the temple of man. This Trinity pattern that I keep showing you right here, the mouth of the Nile, okay, is actually where the spinal cord meets the base of the skull. And that's why you see this right here, this V shape that you see here, and what you see in many paintings that's actually been hidden over time. Sometimes I believe it's subconscious. Sometimes I believe it was actually hidden. You see Jesus right here. The middle of his body actually follows the Nile Delta as well and ends in his head, sitting right where the beginning of the Trinity pattern exists. This dove that you see right in the center of this Trinity pattern is the same as what you see in the Nile Delta. And knowing that that is a brain, then that means that the Trinity is located in the center of the brain. Right here we have Mount Sinai with the brain sitting on top of the Nile. If we take that and we put that inside of a human skull, we can see that actually what he has painted is a brain. So the Trinity is actually inside the brain, in the very center of the brain, and we're going to see that in some other paintings as well, where it's actually been hidden. Where this becomes important right here as far as the Orion Nebula goes is because this also contains the Trinity pattern, located in the same location and at two different levels. First of all, we have this strong lines right here. And this is important because this is something that Michelangelo showed us. It wasn't just El Greco in 1577, but Michelangelo happened to do this back in 1511. He showed us the same thing. And it was because I was seeing the same patterns over and over in these various churches that I was able to notice that the Orion Nebula was being painted. But what does the Orion Nebula represent? It represents the same thing as us, but at a more cosmic level. The painting of what you see here, the creation of Adam, these pictures that you see right here, as you go through, various samples were taken around the whole area. And as you can see, where his arm comes in at the XY coordinates at the Y level, matches in every area. And as you see where his arm goes down right here, it exits at the certain X coordinate and Y coordinate right here, which is the same. Her face is repeated all the way through, and in various fractals you see the same thing. This is nature's way of communicating, and what the template that it's communicating is, it's showing us that man exists at all different levels. This area, what you see in the Orion Nebula, is the same Trinity pattern that you see right here in the very bright spot. This very bright spot right here represents the Trinity pattern. And what we have are two different levels going on here. Because God's arm, this Vesica Pisces that you see right here that connects to his body, is at one level. And if we overlay this on top of Egypt, it actually spans several countries. Taking a look at it at that level, we can see that the Trinity pattern that you see right here, which is actually where the spinal cord meets the base of the skull, is actually repeated right here inside the Orion Nebula. This trapezium area, this triangle, this delta that you see right here, which is the same as what this delta is right here. Here's your delta inside the Orion Nebula. It's this large yellow triangle. And this little pattern that you see right here is the Trinity pattern. But what you see right here, this whole Vesica Pisces area that you see right here, actually spans all of Egypt. You can see the same triangular picture that you see right here is also located right here in Jordan. So this whole area of the Orion Nebula is showing Egypt, Sinai Peninsula, Israel, and Jordan, all combined. But then we have this right here, this smaller area, which is the Trinity pattern, and that happens to be located where you see the vortex here and the trapezium stars. That is directly corresponding to the very center area of the Nile Delta, which corresponds to the Trinity, which corresponds to the very center of our brains. Here is another picture of El Greco's Mount Sinai, 1568. And what I've done is I have circled with black squares various areas to show that he's painted the Nile. The most obvious one is the very top here, where he actually mimics where it stops and where the water starts with the 3 bumps on the top. And everything here is mimicking the Nile. And he's actually showing the human nervous system on top of it. The Nile represents nature's way of showing us the temple of man. And that's going to become important because I'm going to show you now with some sacred geometry that the chakra system that's associated to the Nile and nature's version of the temple of man, the ancient Egyptians also knew about. The good thing about this is that this is nature, and it's not something that was man-made. And we see this repeated all over the place, from the microcosm to the macrocosm. So I happened to stumble across this one site that had done this basically up here at the top, where they had used pyramids, which is what this center area is right here. This is where the base of the spine meets the skull, which is this triangular area right here, where it meets, and it basically they drew a radius. And if you draw a circle using the pyramids as the center point, it actually passes perfectly along the top of the Nile that you see right here. And that began the first part of the flower of life, which I pasted all over Egypt using the pyramids as the center point. And from there, I just kind of carried on until I had all of Egypt covered. And this is important, and we're going to see why. So this is what I began to do. And if you notice, what I did was I used the pyramids that you see right here as the center point. That's where they're located. And if you notice, when you create a circle around it, it covers this area just perfectly. And what I used was this area sticks out the farthest, so that's my edge. Okay. And what I did was, after I created my first circle, my second one of common radius was right here. When I drew this circle, it created a vesica Pisces right here that covered the Nile Delta almost perfectly. You're going to notice that the lines pass through right here. I mean, you can see that the whole area of Egypt, just like we all know, is actually made up using the flower of life. Even when you come over here, you can see that the arcs of these circles, like they go across the shoreline just perfectly. So, and that was my key to knowing that I was right on the money with that. So before we dig into that flower of life pattern on Egypt, what I'd like to do is, we already know that the Jed column represents Osiris at the earliest stages. Let's take a look at his hieroglyph real quick. This is by Professor E.A. Wallace Budge again. And right here, he pretty much digs into his hieroglyph and tells the meaning of it. And I think it's going to make sense after you see what I'm talking about here. It says, we may compare the cuneiform characters for Asari, that is Marduk, and the transcription of them into hieroglyphs. The group of wedges, which are read Asari, and it's composed of 2 distinct characters, these right here. The first has the well-known meaning of tent, or dwelling, or resting place. The second has the meaning of the eye, and is placed inside the sign for tent. Well, a tent is a lot like a triangle. Okay, so we have an eye, and then we have the 2 signs by which these are transcribed in Egyptian are a seat and a throne and an eye. Now the sign and this cuneiform character right here is followed by the text by 2 other cuneiform characters, these 2. These form a title of Asari and are read in Sumerian Ludug, and they mean good man or being. Thus we have Asari, the good being. But we find in the Egyptian texts that one of the principal titles of Osiris is Un-Nefer, and that means good being. And it seems clear that this title is the Egyptian translation of the cuneiform, this right here. Thus there is little doubt that the Egyptian Asar is the equivalent of the Babylonian Asari. So when we take a look at the depictions of what we see in Babylonia, and we see that the archetypes and the symbolism that they represent, as Budge stated, Asari, Asar, Ashur. Ashur is what you see right up here, this winged disc. And from correspondence, what we see right here is this tree of life. And what does this look like right here in the middle? This looks like the Nile again, doesn't it? And right here they're showing pine cones here. They're showing these pine cones right here at the top, just before we get into the area which is considered Trinity, which is what this area is right here. So we have the same thing going on. Ashur, Asari, Asar. This is all represented as a system of enlightenment and the chakra system. And the Nile and the Nile Delta is our nature's way of showing us that it is actually the temple of man, but it's not built by man. And this is good, because this means that we don't have to say somebody was actually deceiving us. We can actually see it in nature. Interestingly, the center of the Orion Nebula actually displays the same winged disk that you see right here. There's a reason why all of these people came up with this same winged disk, holding a ring and everything else. You see the same depiction that you see right here. Now this is the standard infrared version by Spitzer. And what NASA actually has, if you go look for their infrared version, it's got all these rainbow colors on it. By adjusting the contrast and brightness to where you zoom in on the texture of the middle area, you actually get the same thing. You get a winged disk. This black area that you see right here is the vortex area. And you actually see a man face to the side. This is nature right here showing us. It's telling us, it's communicating to us something. But it's more of a representation of man. It represents the Trinity that's located inside of our heads. Now, here's the interesting part. So, people have already seen that, and they place certain temples along the Nile associated with the chakra system. But this doesn't really look much like, you can say, yeah, that means the chakra system, but it really doesn't tell you much. But when you get to the Trinity pattern right here, the spinal column is already pretty cool. It shows us some cool stuff. But when you get to the Trinity pattern, that's where it really shows us that what we're looking at here has to do with nature's version of the Temple of Man. Right here, what I have are different internal versions of the brain right here. These are taken from MRIs. And as you can see, this white area right here, this V shape that you see right here, even though these heads are turned the opposite direction I'd like you to see, this is the version I'd like you to see right here. But that corresponds to what you see right here. This is the Trinity pattern. And what you're going to see is when we put the brain on top of the Nile, just like El Greco showed us, something kind of magical happens. So once again, here is the Temple of Man at Luxor. Notice the way that they have the head here. Okay, they've got the head turned to the side because they're trying to show the human anatomy. Okay, so this Trinity pattern that I keep showing you now, when you take and this is what El Greco showed us, when you take the human nervous system and you put it inside here, you can see that the spinal cord goes right down here and it actually fits just perfectly. The center of the brain, and I could probably have chosen a different brain version, is basically right up here. This is the Trinity right here. And what's also interesting about this is that when you go inside the center of the Nile, there's actually something that represents what appears to be a Trinity. These three locations right here happen to be, and actually Busiris. Show you something real quick. It should actually be moved right here. When we actually take a look at the sacred geometry that we draw using the pyramids right here as the center point and going around the Nile Delta, we find that when our Vesica Pisces is created and we cross the middle of that Vesica Pisces, it crosses the exact same middle of these three areas right here inside this triangle, right here. So we're going to take a look at that. Notice those three areas of the triangle that I showed you right here. And this line goes right through the middle of the Vesica Pisces that was created. and right down the middle right here. This particular area is what the center area is. And as you notice, probably if I had chosen maybe a slightly different MRI version of a brain, because they're all slightly different, but they all contain this trinity, right, that you see right here, and they all fit in that trinity just perfectly. The spinal cord going down and everything, as you see right here. Okay? So something about this area is very important, and what's even more interesting about it is if you try to zoom in on it, you can't see it. It won't let you get to it. This is with clouds and everything taken off. I can't see what's behind that white area, which is in the very center of what that cross is. So once again, you can see that the way that the land changes from the desert to the Nile Delta area basically mimics the way that you see. This is what the Trinity pattern actually is. It represents an archetype showing us that the Trinity is located right in the center of our brains, and it's actually very close to the pineal gland, which is this what you see right here. Okay. Second point that's really interesting that I discovered here is that where the pyramids are actually located, they actually divide Upper and Lower Egypt. This is what was called Lower Egypt. This is what was called Upper Egypt. And I think that has to do with the way the water flows. But what we have here is we have the pyramids located right on the border between the spine, or the spinal column, and the actual brain itself. And when you take a look at the internal parts of the human anatomy, it was done that way for a reason. Because this area that you see right here, and this is a blown up version where this is actually the center of the brain, are actually called the pyramids of the brain for whatever reason. These are called the pyramids of the brain, and they're located exactly where the Great Pyramids are. This is Jadu. Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, because when I created the whole flower of life, what I did was I had found a pattern of the tree of life, and I noticed it was inside the flower of life. And so what I did was I took this tree of life and I put it on top of these points that you see right here. You see all these are actually on each one of these points. Well, the interesting thing that came out is that if you notice, these areas that fall right in line with the very center points, the flower of life here, this right here is the temple Elephantine that you see right here. And it just so happens that right where the Temple of Man was, you see these areas right here, the flower of life, when I started completing it all over Egypt, it pasted it right where these lines meet. And you find that over the various areas inside these other areas of Egypt. So these temples are actually falling almost right in line with what you see on the flower of life. Now, this area, and by the way, this is Hermopolis, Amarna, and Asiut, and this has to do with it's where the heart chakra is, and so right up here, which is really interesting, is where you have what's called the door. You have wisdom and understanding, which is Chakma, and this is right where the Great Pyramids are. And then you have the crown chakra, or the Trinity, and that happens to be when you draw the line right through there, right where the center of the Nile Delta is. Now, I don't think that there's some kind of a mistake, or I think there's no way that this could be a coincidence, that these things are falling exactly in line with what you see as far as the tree of life goes. This is nature's version of the Temple of Man. And if you're not afraid to anthropomorphize here, because that's really what's going on, you actually see that the brain fits in there just perfectly. This is actually the outline of a man stretched all the way down the Nile, where his body is at an angle all the way down the Nile, until you get to his toes that actually stick out inside the Red Sea. This whole area right here is man. This is his brain, and this is his face right here. And the reason that makes sense is because if we take a look at the various chakras, this is right at the base of the skull where it should be. This is right in the center of the brain. That's two areas that we know right there that fit perfectly. The Trinity area, which is what El Greco showed us, this area right here, you can anthropomorphize it just fine. And if you take a look at the area where the sinus area, where the brain stops right here, you can actually see the Suez Canal doing the same thing with the land right here. So right there, where the land curves up, it's matching where the brain should be. So I don't think it is something that is crazy to do to anthropomorphize. When you start understanding the way nature is presenting itself, you can actually see the whole body here. You can see the chest. You can see, and as you go down, this represents the heart chakra area, I believe, somewhere in here. Here's foundation. Here's your here's foundation right here, and your root chakra, which basically covers the whole bottom part of your body. So whether to me it looks like a perfect person leaning at an angle all the way down the Nile, and here's his head right up here, and it all falls in line with exactly what has been shown to us. This is nature's version of the Temple of Man. Now let's flip back over here to the Jed real quick, and let's take a look at some pieces from the pyramid text. It says right here, "Raise yourself, my father, receive your 4 pleasant provisions jars, bathe in the jackal lake, be cleansed in the lake of the netherworld, be purified on top of your lotus flower in the field of rushes, raise yourself, go in spirit state." We can see many depictions of the lotus flower and its correspondence to the way the Nile looks. Right here is showing somebody with a lotus flower on top of their head. So be purified on top of your lotus flower means be purified on top of your head, which is right here, which is right where we expect it to be, at the very top of the spine in the middle of the head. And then it says, raise yourself, go in spirit state. Now, here they show Osiris, the ram, Lord of Jadu. Now, contrary to popular belief, the whole idea of the ram is not about Aries. Okay, I understand that a lot of people believe it has something to do with a constellation, but the reason they depicted Osiris as a ram god, Lord of Jadu, is because Jadu is associated with what is in the center of your brain. And what is in the center of your brain looks almost just like, when you take a look at the lateral and third ventricles, they look just like ram horns. The reason he was depicted as a ram god and the Lord of Jadu is because he was the governor of Busiris, the Lord of Jadu. And that is right in what's in the very center of your brain. That's what this has to do with. This looks kind of funny. I put some rams, but I wanted to depict what is actually going on here. They were very visual and anthropomorphic, and so what they were showing when they showed him as a ram god, they were showing what's actually in the center of your brain, which looks just like ram horns. So the idea that this has something to do with the Aries constellation, I believe, is probably misunderstood. See, as you see right here, it says the ram's horns are a common feature of the crown of Osiris, his crown chakra. And at times he's described as being two-horned, tall of crown, and having great presence in Jadu, which is the very center. Great presence in Jadu, right in the center of your brain. The crown chakra, the ram's horns. That's what this is all about. And this is part that gets kind of interesting here. It says, he found the soul of Re there, and they embraced each other. It says, O you of Jadu, which is Busiris, O Jed pillar, which is in the place where the soul is found. That's very interesting. This is written a long time ago. So who else believed that the soul was found there? Well, here we come back here, because this is our representation of the cosmic brain, or the cosmic man. And it has been stated by many neurologists that Michelangelo painted a picture of the brain. And right where the bright spot is right where God is. God is right where the bright spot is. And that represents the left edge, what you see right here, of this vesica Pisces, where this bright spot is. And that is where the pineal gland is located. We're going to see that here in just a second. This is where the eye on the throne is. That is what Osiris represents. The eye in the triangle, the eye on the throne, is the pineal gland. Here we see a very interesting connection. All this is no coincidence. It says, I have gone up by means of the staff, which is in the place where the soul is found. I have gone up on the ladder with my foot on Orion and my arm uplifted. Right here, Pyramid Text 437. The netherworld has grasped your hand at the place where Orion is. Bull of the sky has given you his hand. May a stairway to the netherworld be set up for you to the place where Orion is. May the bull of the sky take your hand. May Orion give me his hand. Now let's back up here and take a look at this part. The jet is frequently used to symbolize the sun and its rising, and like the jet is a commonly used metaphor for the rebirth of the king's soul. In chapter 17 of the Book of the Dead, the soul of Osiris finds the soul of Re and Jadu. Now what a lot of people don't know is that the Orion constellation is not part of one of the 12 constellations that's used in astrology. However, it does mimic the path of the sun. And what's significant about this is that it says he found the soul of Re there, and they embraced each other. He found the soul of Re and Jadu, and they embraced each other. Why is that important? Right here I'm on usbible.com/astrology. And right here it says a photograph of Orion personified as the Son of Man riding on a cloud. It says, Orion as seen in human form. His right hand could be holding a sickle or a club. His left hand could be holding an animal skin or shield or bow. The Milky Way is behind him. The arc above him represents the sun's path. The line going through his waist is the celestial equator, which runs parallel to the Earth's equator. It says the timing of Orion's cycle fits with the birth of Jesus on December 25th. It makes its first appearance in the east in mid-December each year. And as the season progresses, Orion rises with the sun and sets in the west 3 days before it rises in the east again. With the sun personified as Jesus, it is accurate to think of Orion as a constellation in sync with the sun's cycle. In a sense, they are conjoined twins to suffer the same fate. This is why the confusion about whether Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of Man in the third person, or whether the Son of Man is some cosmic judge. Now it says here in Revelations, it says, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. In the midst of the golden candlesticks, 7 of them. And what's in the midst of the 7 candlesticks? This right here. And why is it like unto a Son of Man? Well, first you have to understand what that means. When you say son of something, what does that mean?
And so we unlearn what we knew in the beginning. And in the course of life, if we're fortunate, we discover again what we really are. That each one of us is what would be called in Arabic or Hebrew the Son of God. And the word son of means of the nature of, as when you call someone a son of a bitch. Or in Arabic you say Ebedi Kelb, which means son of a dog, Ebedi El Homar, son of a donkey. So, a son of Belial means an evil person. Son of God means a divine person.
So, what we see in the midst of the 7 candlesticks is like that of the Son of Man, which means like man. And what we see inside the Orion Nebula is a representation of something that looks just like man. The Trinity pattern that is found inside the Orion Nebula, which also overlays on top of the Nile perfectly. As you can see, the human brain fits in there just like it fits on the Nile, just like it fits on the Temple of Man on Earth, but this is a cosmic version of it. And this vortex that you see right here is right in the center of the brain, right where the Trinity is. And when I show you these things right here, this Trinity that you see in the Orion Nebula trapezium area that overlays on top of the Nile is important because this is a representation showing an archetype of the temple of man, which is actually right here. And so when it says, and if you see, all these various areas have repeated fractals that go all the way through them. And so why is it that he found the soul of Ra and they embraced each other in Jeddu? Because with the accessing his pineal gland, the eye on the throne, the eye in the tent, which is what his hieroglyph is, he embraced higher consciousness. When it says in the Bible that we were made in God's image, it didn't actually specify in what way. But at least for now, we can see that the archetype that represents man all the way up to a cosmic scale has to do with this repeated Trinity pattern that we see all over the place, where the area of focus is right in the center of the brain where the pineal gland is. In Genesis 32:30, it says that Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved. Other artists have given us clues about this area. Right here you have Hendrik van Balen. This is called Trinity in 1620. Notice the same Trinity pattern shape and the top of the spinal cord right here. And notice where Trinity is, right in the center of the brain. Leonardo da Vinci did the same thing in the Last Supper. This area that you see right here, and his finger pointing upwards. Notice the open space, notice the spinal cord, and notice that this area follows what we have right here, and guess where he's pointing to? Right in the center of the brain. This is what he was showing us. Here's another version of it. Same Trinity pattern. Notice that the brain, the way the brain fits in there just perfectly. Notice where Trinity is, right in the center of where Jesus is. This is what they were showing us in their art. Here it is again. You have the same area, the way that the Nile is shaped, exactly the same, and then straight up you have the Tetragrammaton. This also follows the pattern of the Trinity pattern once again. This is also shaped like the Nile Delta, if you notice. And right here in the center of the brain, you have Trinity. Interestingly, this also matches the Orion Nebula as well as many of the others. The reason that they all match is because the Orion Nebula represents man on a cosmic scale. And we see this in art all over the place, where these people have pulled from their subconscious or the collective unconsciousness the Orion Nebula, which represents our cosmic mind. And this template that you see right here, this particular template that we see all over the place, is a representation of man. It's our archetype. These are old pictures showing the eye that everyone's so afraid of. This is the reason why that they want you to be afraid of it. They don't want you to look at the symbolism because they don't want you to understand what all this symbolizes. The eye in the throne, the eye in the triangle, the eye in the delta represents Busiris. This area right here, the eye in the triangle, right in the very center of the Nile Delta. It represents what's in the center of your head, and they don't want you to know about it. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope this clears up a lot for everybody, and I hope it kind of helps you. Now, if you haven't read Hermetics or understand Hermetic philosophy, and if you don't understand the principle of as above, so below, as below, so above, you really got to go read the Kabbalion, and it will help you out in understanding how the correspondence of all these things makes sense, from the mental to the physical to the cosmic and so on. And so what the Orion Nebula represents is it represents us at a cosmic scale. It is the Son of Man. It's basically us at a cosmic scale. It shows the same template. It shows the same Trinity pattern that we saw inside the Temple of Man right here. This is us. This is the image for which we were created. And you can find it everywhere. It comes out in art, it comes out in nature, and it comes out in the cosmos. Y'all take care, and I'll talk to you soon.